Happy Sunday, everybody. Hope you're all having a good week. We're coming to the end of week 9 of, is it still Foundations? It's still Foundations, right? So, in February, I think on the second week of February, we're going to be getting a new standard set called Aether Drift. And, they're also going to be bringing back a lot of the older sets for draft. So I don't know how many of you actually do draft, but I do a fair amount of it on Twitch. And I've been enjoying Pioneer Masters, but it's also fun to do the flashbacks, and they're going to bring back Cube and all that fun stuff. So, but anyway, every Sunday, what I like to do is I like to do my best of one meta breakers. And the meta breakers are off-meta picks that were successfully piloted to Mythic with over a 60% win rate and for at least 50 matches with a single deck to try to give it a little bit of a decent sample size, right? You still get some people who get through with a questionable deck who got a little bit lucky in their matchups or whatever, right? But so take these with a grain of salt. These definitely have less data behind them than the best of one, best of three meta review that I do every Monday. And but it's fun to talk about the kind of alternative strategies, and it's a good way to cover some of the decks that are quite viable to take to Mythic that aren't in the top 8 in my best of one meta review. So they are going to be focused on best of one decks, not best of three. Some of them are best of three decks that have a full sideboard, like this one. And I won't really be talking about the sideboard or the sideboard strategies. I keep, if you want to look at my sideboard strategy for Gruul Aggro, it's in the community tab. And if you want to hear my thoughts on Gruul Aggro, wait for it to win a top number 1 spot or number 2 spot in the standard challenge in the best of 3 meta review. So this one, it's also kind of a fun little game that we play because it's fun to give people shout outs if they have a particularly nice climb into Mythic. So this one's Gruul Aggro by Wolverine 131 and with 110 and 78. Which is technically 59%, but it was 59.8% before they hit Mythic, and so we'll give it to them. And this one, it's nothing special. This one's kind of this is the Gruul Aggro that we see, or a variation that we see in Best of 3 that we've talked about throughout the weeks before. Running the 2 Pop Hatch Recruit instead of the 2 Snakeskin Veil to punish the single point interaction. Running 3 Questing Druids, which is going to help you against the less aggro matchups where you need a little bit more dig. And then also running 2 copies of the Innkeeper's Talent. We see this one fluctuate all the way between 0 and 4. The rest of the deck is the mono red build, leaning off of the trifecta of the mice synergies of Heartfire Hero, Manifold Mouse, and Emberheart Challenger. And then we have Screaming Nemesis, and you have the ability to shoot Screaming Nemesis with Burst Lightning and Torch the Tower. So what I think is kind of interesting about this build is, so you've got all 4 interaction. Usually you bring in Torch the Tower from the sideboard when you're up against other aggro matchups in best of 3. And so since we're playing this one in best of 1, we can kind of hedge that we're going to be up against the decks that want the single point interaction and aren't getting punished by it by not having a board, right? So, and then running the Questing Druid, though, is kind of in conflict with that a little bit because these cards help out more against the mid-range. So, but anyway, interesting take on it for best of 1. I like the direction they took it in, and I am not surprised to see that it did well. Gotta get some of my coffee here this morning too, so it's early. It's the first thing I do every Sunday morning. So, excuse me for a moment. Ooh, that's good stuff. Okay, so, yeah, sadly, my brain immediately went to David Lynch passing away this week, and if you've noticed, my welcoming screen in Twitch is the Black Lodge from Twin Peaks, and so I'm a pretty big David Lynch fan, and he's on to the next place, right? So rest in peace. And but this one's Azorius Omniscience by Valhoon, and went 50 and 9. 50 and 9 for an 85% win rate. And this deck I first saw piloted and created by Sonio, who's another Magic the Gathering content creator. If you haven't checked them out, I highly recommend them. And we've seen this also showing up in the tournament scene. It's a relatively consistent turn 4 Omniscience. And you're milling either through the Confounding Riddle, Picklock Prankster, Moment of Truth, Chart a Course if you have it already in your hand. Either way, you're trying to get the Omniscience into your graveyard by turn 4 so that you can hit it with a Boilo's Awakening with X equals 0 to bring back the Omniscience. Once you have the Omniscience in play, you play an Invasion of Arcavios. Invasion of Arcavios then has a couple of different options to go grab a loop, right? And so this one is Unnerving Grasp, allows you to bounce the Invasion of Arcavios and replay the Unnerving Grasp, creating a 2/2 Manifest Dread for every card that you have in your library. You can also get the Heroic Reinforcements to then give everything haste so that you don't have to wait a turn to attack with your 2/2s, which was the downside with the original build that I saw with this. So the Heroic Reinforcements was a good addition. And then Season of Weaving is also another really great way to bounce everything that your opponent has and then loop through replaying your Invasion of Arcavios. You do need to get the Omniscience down as a copy. So you need to have a token of the Omniscience so that it doesn't get bounced by the Season of Weaving. But the nice thing about this is because this is it's a creature. When you change it with the Boilo's Awakening, that allows it to be copied by Season of Weaving so that you can leave an Omniscience on the board when you bounce everything, and then you just continue through the loop, right? So these three being your primary loops, and then negate and get lost and exercise for a little bit of like if you need to protect your loop from a counterspell kind of thing. And number 3 here, this is not done in any particular order, just how I pick them out throughout the weeks. So this one is Boros Aggro, or Boros Mice, although I think Boros Mice has more mice synergies than just adding the Mabel. And then Boros Burn tends to have like the Bolt Wave. So I'm going to call this one Boros Aggro. And by Grim Gamori, went 65 and 28 for a 70% win rate. And so it's the mono red shell, which has been doing very well in Best of 1 with the Heartfire Hero, Manifold Mouse, Emberheart Challenger, Screaming Nemesis, and Hired Claw, all pretty standard. And then we're adding the white so that we have the Shard Mage's Rescue, like we do see in Boros Auras, same with the Sheltered by Ghosts. Lightning Helix then helps with a little bit of stabilization from the life gain, and then Boros Charm gives you an additional double strike. We've seen some versions playing the Slick Shot Show Off, which is with the 3 Shard Mages Rescue, you could go in that direction as well. They both have pros and cons. Again, Magic the Gathering is all about pros and cons. But giving you the life stabilization against the mono red can kind of give you that edge in that matchup. But without leaning so heavily into the Aura Voltron strategy, which can kind of struggle a little bit against the Dimir and Esper bounce decks, which are can be looping the Nowhere to Run, which makes the Sheltered by Ghosts weaker. So kind of hedging your matchups a little bit in that way. And then Mabel, we've seen this one included more often in Best of 3 than we do in Best of 1, but the short sword that it creates, the Crag Flame, which I guess is not actually a short sword because it has it equipped too, but is a good way to kind of extend the Valiant triggers in this deck instead of relying entirely on your Rockface villages, which then allows you to also have stuff like the excuse me, the Manlands, and so this is a little bit better in the mid-range if it extends into that point. And we also have a second version of Gruul Aggro that's not the Gruul Delirium strategy. When I first saw Inti, I thought it was going to be the Gruul Delirium. Excuse me. So this is a second version of Gruul Aggro that we'll cover this week. And this one was by Maki, 58 and 30 for a 66% win rate. And this one has some graveyard synergies, so you can use the NT to fuel your own Scavenging Ooze. The putting a +1/+1 counter on something does fit into the Valiant strategies of the mice. And then the Paw Patch Recruit really helps punish this. The deck's natural weakness in mono red is mono black, and so the single point interaction Paw Patch Recruit can kind of negate that strategy, along with the Innkeeper's Talent giving things ward, can make it a little bit more resilient to your opponent's removal outside of sweepers. And then, yeah, the Scavenging Ooze allows you to kind of disrupt the strategies like the Azorius Omniscience deck that we just covered, on top of just being a large threat of itself. Now, the downside is that this does have a green mana to activate instead of like a colorless mana, which can be a little bit burdensome in a deck that wants to be majority red. So that's the downside, is that you have to bring in a fair amount of there's some tension in your mana base, which is going to lower the consistency of the strategy. And then they also are running the 3 copies of the Soulstone Sanctuary, which I think is a little bit of a bold move to be running 3 copies in a deck that has some tension on the sources that they need to hit. But you've got 16 sources of green, you've got 18 sources of red, so like they're making it work. And yeah, it looks like a fun little take on Gruul Aggro. And number 5 here is the Raise the Past combo by Iron Man 4. And this deck is all about Amalia is really key to getting this strategy to work because of the Explore. So every time that you gain a life, then Amalia explores, and you want to put everything into your graveyard. You want to just mill through your deck as quickly as you can. And Snarling Gorehound also helps you surveil, and again, you want to be pushing a lot of those cards to your graveyard. And the reason for that is Raise the Past. So if you cast Raise the Past, you can return the entirety of the deck. I did a gameplay video of this quite like a month ago or so. There's a couple of cards that sometimes people play, like Zoraline, and taking it in a little bit more of like a bat synergy direction, because there are a fair amount of bats in this strategy. So you've got Life Creed Duo, Deep Cavern Bat, and Starscape Cleric, that you can lean further into the bat synergies. The downside with Zoraline is that it doesn't get hit by Raise the Past, but it does have the ability to bring something back like Amalia. But this one has a lot of interesting ETBs, because whenever a creature enters, you gain a life. Whenever you gain a life, your opponents lose a life. You also have the Sanctifier to double dip on that. And then whenever your creatures die, your opponent loses a life. So you can kind of just do this like really crazy board flood strategy. And then if they wipe your board, you can just bring it back. It's prone to exile effects like the Temporary Lockdown and Sunfall and things that like prevent your combo from going to the graveyard and coming back. But the life gain helps stabilize against the mono red aggro strategies, and mono black, it gets punished because if you're killing the creatures, they're just going to come back outside of them being exiled by something like Anoint with Affliction, right? So yeah, fun little strategy. I've played it myself, and it definitely punishes some strategies on the ladder. Oh, and I wasn't sure if I actually covered this, but this one was 118 and 74 for a 61% run rate. And last but not least is Jeskai Convoke, and I screwed up the shout out, so I'm going to have to splice this in, but this was the Jeskai Convoke by Rudolphu, and went 32 and 15 for a 68% win rate. So not quite 50 matches, but if the rest of the matches were all losses, it would still be above 60%. Boros Convoke has actually been doing pretty well too. Just saying, right? It's a turn slower than the Jeskai Convoke strategy, but it's a little bit more consistent in the mana, because you don't have to bring in the third color. But the reason why we're going into the 3-color space is because of Spyglass Siren. So the original Boros Convoke build prior to rotation had the Voldaren Epicure, which allows you to get that blood token, and then you can sacrifice that blood token to Gleeful Demolition, which is all part of the strategy of getting a turn 2 Knight Errant of Eos convoked out. You do need a white creature like Novice Inspector or Warden of the Inner Sky, but then hopefully you dig for your Convoke with the Knight Errant of Eos and hit into an Imidane's Recruiter. And then on turn 3, you play down the Imidane's Recruiter and swing in for a ton of damage. Now, this strategy used to be weak against mono red, and it has the Sheltered by Ghosts, which has definitely helped increase that matchup. And in best of 3, you have the counter spells that you can run that then also help the matchup against control. So This one is bringing in War Leader's Call. I've seen some people playing the doll that can attack and gain life, and your opponent loses life, and you gain that much life for each power 2 or less. Arabella's doll or whatever. And War Leader's Call is a classic one. This one's also a card that's better against the control matchups, allowing you to kind of get a little bit further reach, since it deals the direct damage to your opponent, even if you're not getting blockers or attackers through. This one's leaning a little bit further into needing the white, or needing the blue early, with bringing in the Mockingbird. And the Mockingbird allows you to copy any of the cards. I mean, Knight Errant of Eos is one that's not the best one to copy, but the playing 8 copies of your Imidane's Recruiter is not necessarily bad. It also helps you kind of get more consistency on your early plays, because you can also do like turn 2 Resolute Reinforcements into turn 3 Knight Errant of Eos, and then turn 4 Imidane's Recruiter. And that line is usually what you'll see more in Boros Convoke, because again, you're missing the artifact creator on turn 1. We did also see Clockwork Percussionist being played in this for a little bit, typically I think over the Mockingbird, to have a artifact that you can target with the Gleeful Demolition that plays similar to the Yoshin Frontliner, which was the colorless 1/1. And so yeah, it's an interesting strategy. It's a go wide strategy, so it punishes mono black pretty heavily, being resistant to the single point interaction. So if you haven't played the Convoke deck, check it out. See if you decide if you like the Jeskai version, how deeply you want to go into blue, and then if you like it more or less than the Boros Convoke strategy, because there can be some mana inconsistencies with this one for sure. But it has everything. It has the bare bones that you need, right? It has the 14 sources of red for the turn 1 Gleeful Demolition, as well as the 14 sources of blue for the Spyglass Siren, and the 16 sources of white for the rest of the deck. So with that, though, thank you for listening to my ramblings, as always. Thank you, everybody, for the support that you have shown me throughout the years. Those who have come over from YouTube and watched me on Twitch, appreciate that as well. And then thank you, everyone, to my YouTube members for helping support my dream. This one, it's one of those things that I dream of doing it full time, but it's a long shot from that. So I appreciate the support. And good luck with your climbs, good luck with your RCQs, and I will see you all tomorrow for the best of 1, best of 3 meta review. Take care.